those transformational nurse educators hanging out tonight who are here from the very beginning. So if you are here right now, I'd like you to throw your state in the chat. Let me know where you're at. And it's exciting to kind of have all of you together tonight to share some very powerful and practical information related to the dissertation study I just completed and successfully defended last month. But if you're checking this Facebook Live for the first time, the goal of this broadcast is to support and serve the needs of nurse educators in the trenches. So you're empowered with practical strategies to better prepare your students for practice and licensure. And my name is Keith, and I'm the CEO of Keith RN, where I've been developing and collaborating with nurse educators, creating unfolding case studies that emphasize clinical reasoning since about 2012. And there's a couple of updates and things I'd like to share. And thank you, Kari. Thanks for sharing. Good to have you here. As I look back at my journey, there's something I want to celebrate with you all tonight. Many of you know that about a year ago this month, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in the middle of my PhD studies. And I made the choice that I wasn't going to miss a beat. I had a radical prostatectomy in November and have had my third negative PSA every 3 months. And so I'm thankful for that, thanking God for a new chance, a new beginning. And so, you know what? I'm thankful to be done with my PhD. I'm thankful for life. And, you know, cancer kind of gives you a sense of gratitude, but I really feel that I missed some things because, you know what? I didn't have a chance to really slow down and let this sink in because, you know what? When you have cancer or a cancer diagnosis, it doesn't define you. But I believe we need to learn from that journey. We need to learn. There's something we need to slow down and listen to. And I never had that chance. And so, you know what? I'm really excited to take a little bit of time off next week because I'm just really, really tired. And, you know, I finished the PhD the first of this month. And, you know, as I look back, you know, one of the things I just love to share with some of you who may be considering your PhD journey, I'd love to encourage you to go for it. I was 55, and it was kind of like either now or never. And you know what? I didn't want to live with regrets. And so I went for it at 55. Now I'm 57. I think I still got some life in me by the grace of God. I'm going to keep going. But you know what? I kind of have really become sobered. And I'm going to share some things in the close tonight. But you know, when you have any form of education, whether it be your master's, a baccalaureate, a PhD, you're privileged because most in this world do not have that education. And it's really an opportunity to serve and to serve well. And I've been it's kind of like a Spider-Man thing. You know, remember the first Spider-Man about 15 years ago? There's a famous scene where his uncle is saying to the Spidey-Man, when he's not a Spider-Man, he's just a normal boy, with great power comes great responsibility. And, you know, I've really been kind of sobered by that responsibility since I've finished my program and kind of wondering where those next steps will take me. So I've got some thoughts that I'm going to share with you at the end. So please stick with me. And I've got some great information I'm going to share tonight. And I'm excited to present it to you all here. But like I was saying before, am I the only nurse educator on this chat and in this Facebook Live that's tired? You know, and what I mean is a tiredness of the soul and the spirit as well as the body. You know, many of us are going at paces that have been way too fast for way too long. And, you know, we were not created to be at the pace that our culture and our programs demand that we be at. And, you know, one book that I read that just has really spoken to me and want to just kind of throw out to you tonight, it's called Margin: Restoring Emotional, Physical, Financial, and Time Reserves to Overloaded Lives. And if that describes you as an educator, you know, the problem with being tired in that soul in your spirit is that if you don't do something to change, it's going to progressively lead to further stages. You're at first stage 1 of burnout, by the way, when you are perpetually tired. And I'm there, by the way. So I'm heading to the North Shore. I live in the Twin Cities here in Minnesota, and I'm heading to Duluth and the North Shore of Lake Superior for about 4 days of next week. So I'm excited to I just got to get out. I've got to do something differently. And some of you don't have that option or luxury, but I want to encourage you. If you got school coming and breathing down your neck, I want to encourage you, go at this pace. Go at the speed of soul. Not the speed of light, not the speed of getting things done, but what gives your soul rest to go the distance. Does anybody here want to be a shooting star? You burn bright, but then you're totally gone. And we need you in nursing education. And I know that many of us struggle with burnout. I'm just being real tonight, guys. And so I just want to share that with you. And I just hope that if you've got opportunities, slow it down. Put some margin in your life. Those blank spaces, the book margin, you have a margin in the paper. There's nothing written there. That blank space is called stillness. It's called quiet. It's called doing nothing except just pausing and restoring your soul. So I want to encourage you. Not that you need my permission, but I want you to go for that. And so just to wrap up some things that we've talked about here on Facebook Live, and these Facebook Lives are recorded. That's the awesome thing that I love about this, is that we have some great sessions. You didn't miss it. If you missed it last time or the week before, just go to my Keith RN page, Think Like a Nurse, and go to videos on the far left column. And every Facebook Live we've had for the last 3 months or so, this has been kind of a fun journey, are there with the title. So find what may be of interest. But 3 weeks ago, I talked with Dr. Marianne Biangoni about student resilience and grit. And she was also a presenter at the conference last week that some of you were at. And 2 weeks ago, Dr. Sally Kennedy talked about the science of learning and Socratic questioning to strengthen student learning. So go to those links. There's some good information there. And also had the conference last week. It was a great conference, a half day, 4 hours CEU. Want to let you know if you missed it, I'm planning to break down each of those conference sessions into 1 hour webinars that are going to be posted on Keith RN at a very affordable price. You're not going to get a discount by not watching the conference live, but it's going to be close. And so the bottom line is in the next, hopefully, couple weeks or so, I'm going to pause a little bit. But if you want to catch those and you missed it, not too late. There's some great content there. And so tonight, I just want to let you know, I'm going to be presenting my dissertation study on the topic of the impact of unfolding case studies on the development of critical thinking in baccalaureate nursing students. And so as we look at this topic, before I dig into this, you know what? Just like it takes a village to raise a child, you don't do a dissertation study on your own. I just want to just briefly pause and say thank you to my dissertation committee at William Carey University in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Dr. Markey, my major professor, Dr. Barton, Dr. Lundstrom, and my fearless statistician, Dr. Roberts, who is very patient with me, as well as my student colleagues, the Fab Four we call ourselves, because we wouldn't get out through the program without each other's support. That's Marianne, Kat, and Marina, as well as my wife, Rhonda, who gave me the green light to pursue my PhD at a sacrifice to our family and the time commitment it took. So thank you. But I also want to just kind of let you know about William Carey University, because I would not have gotten my PhD had I not come across Dr. Karen Sicard at a conference where they were having a booth and I was speaking. They had an accelerated PhD program. I never heard of such a thing. I heard of accelerated BSN programs, but they had an accelerated or a guided dissertation program that in 2 years you could go full time. And if you have a master's, like I had my master's in nursing education, I got credit for just about everything. I only had 2 classes every term. I was almost a part-time student. I did it spinning the platters at Keith RN. It wasn't a stretch. It was a stretch, but it wasn't. And so, if you're kind of looking for a process, like you can get your PhD in 2 years, it can be done. And it's a rigorous program. It's affordable. I don't have the link here, but you know what? Go to William Carey University and go to their PhD program in nursing. I'm not promoting them, but I do want to let you know they're out there. because I never would have gotten my PhD. I don't want to spend 4 years at 55, 56 and being 60 plus. That wasn't attractive to me. So I'm just very thankful this study wouldn't have happened had it not been for their kind of innovative and unique guided dissertation program. So I want to thank them for that. And so again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight some really important principles from my final defense. And it's not going to be a final defense. Don't you worry. We're not going to make this like a academic PowerPoint. But I do have my PowerPoint that I'm going to highlight some really important principles that I want you to kind of be in tune with. And I think we find it very helpful. My study was titled The Impact of Unfolding Case Studies on the Development of Critical Thinking in Baccalaureate Nursing Students. I need to just pause for just a minute because my study had to be radically changed towards the last third of the study, because the original study title was the effect of case studies on the development of clinical judgment, critical thinking, and clinical reasoning. I was going to do a study that has never been done or published in the nursing literature. I was going to evaluate all three cognitive constructs of what goes into the outcome of clinical judgment: critical thinking, clinical reasoning, and then the outcome of clinical judgment using a simulation and Lassiter's clinical judgment rubric, a faculty observed simulation, pre-test, post-test, using the reasoning framework of the rubric for the reasoning, the judgment, and then another online instrument called the health science reasoning test for the critical thinking. Towards the end of the study, the pandemic hit. This was about February. We all remember that. Well, my study was just finishing up, and I could not do the post-test faculty observed simulation. And so my study had to, in essence, be gutted. And I could not do the simulation, had to go back and do IRB approval all over again. And I could only evaluate one construct with my unfolding case studies that I've written, and that was critical thinking. And so I share that because I'm going to kind of dance a little bit back and forth, because what my study was not what I envisioned it to be. And it's not that I have sour grapes, it is what it is. But I want you to know that one of the reasons I'm presenting tonight is that I am hoping to plant some seeds out there, because there's additional studies that need to be done. And I'd love to see you take some of the essence of what I've developed with the framework, and you can be in touch with me, and I would be glad to help you do similar studies on the topic of unfolding case studies and development of clinical judgment. And so when we look at this topic, this is a hot topic right now, clinical judgment. Now, my study only focused on critical thinking, but it was originally designed to use Lassiter's framework and using the Tanner's model of clinical judgment and those 4 steps of noticing, interpreting, responding, reflecting, to make the outcome of the judgment and the summative score of the rubric. But as we know, our students do not possess the clinical judgment for safe practice currently. Kavanaugh and Svita's study in 2017, I've talked about that repeatedly in my blog and all that I do. 23% of graduate nurses, all who pass the NCLEX, have adequate levels of clinical judgment. That's why Next Gen is coming. So that's the current problem. So we need to strengthen nursing education, transform it, as Dr. Benner talked about in her book, Educating Nurses, back in 2010. So this transformation of nursing education is still needed. We're not there. We're not even close, but we can all be part of the needed change. And I wanted my study to help be that. And so one of the things that I've noticed in the literature, high fidelity simulation has been the rage in nursing education for about the last 15 years. We've got some great, Pam Jeffries has done phenomenal work on that topic. And we've made a really strong correlation. High fidelity simulation does develop clinical judgment. And that has been in the literature. We've got great studies that have validated that finding. But guess what? We have literally nothing on the effect of unfolding case studies that replicate the thinking of simulation just without the skills lab. That's the gap in the literature. And if you're an educator, you know that high fidelity simulation, we know it works. But how many times do your students get it in a semester? It's faculty intensive, it's time intensive, and it's expensive. High fidelity mannequins can be 6 figures. Your skills lab can be $250,000. Not every program has that luxury. But an unfolding case study on a piece of paper, well written, captures Tanner's framework, that is the big question mark. And that's what we don't have a lot of literature on. And I'm going to share kind of some of the aspects of that. But the bottom line is that, the practice preparation gap in nursing education, how nursing is taught and how it's practiced, there is a disconnect. And they're not connecting as they should. That's part of the reason we're struggling with clinical judgment. It's been documented since 1974. We've got problems like failure to rescue, where nurses are missing things, patients are having adverse outcomes and are even dying. That's been documented for about the last 20 years. It's still a problem. And again, we can change that in nursing education. So the purpose of my study was to study the impact of unfolding case studies that integrate clinical reasoning on the development of critical thinking in senior baccalaureate nursing students. And again, was looking at the original study was going to evaluate critical thinking, clinical reasoning, and clinical judgment. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And so the question that was really guiding this study was that what's the impact on critical thinking among baccalaureate nursing students when they're taught using unfolding case studies that emphasize clinical reasoning compared to traditional instruction. And so my goal was to do, and I did implement an experimental study in essence with a control group that received classroom instruction. The assignment goes to the experimental group that then received the intervention of additional 1 hour faculty guided using the unfolding case studies that I've written. Using, if you're familiar with my Keith RN cases, the unfolding reasoning, which is my more complex, it's about 8 pages in length, but the students came to have a faculty guided discussion with the unfolding reasoning that practices Tanner's framework of clinical reasoning. And so, I'm not going to talk a lot about Tanner's framework, but you know what? Tanner's framework and her model of clinical judgment, that needs to be in every nursing program in our country. And that's one of the weaknesses, I think, that we sometimes are a little loosey-goosey with our curriculum structures. And this theoretical framework of Tanner needs to be integrated, and it would strengthen the thinking if we really had this foundation laid. And so I want to encourage you to all be change agents out there. Look at your curriculum. Look at those kind of things that are hidden. Like, what is our theoretical framework? Do we have one? If not, let's make Tanner's model of clinical judgment, published in 2006. The title of that article, you can Google it and then get it off your CINAHL database, Thinking Like a Nurse. I think it's a research-based model of clinical judgment. Chris Tanner, one of my heroes, 2006. So a couple of the assumptions that, when you look at a study, you have assumptions that senior baccalaureate students do possess some degree of critical thinking, and that critical thinking can be measured quantitatively. Not, using qualitative studies are good. I'm kind of a numbers guy. I wanted numbers pre, post, intervention. Let's see what the difference is. Is it significant? But again, the original study used Lassiter's framework and using simulation where we were going to quantitatively measure clinical reasoning with each of those, the summative score of the noticing aspect of the rubric, the interpreting, the responding, and the evaluation. And then the judgment was going to be quantitatively measured as the summative score of Lassiter's rubric. And again, that's the part that didn't get done. We just did the intervention and then the health science reasoning test, which is an online instrument. And so when we look at the literature review, I'm not going to bore you to death with this, but what I really want you to recognize is this. There's not a lot of literature on the topic of low fidelity simulation, which unfolding case studies, and that can also be virtual sim, by the way, and looking at some of the technology-based products that are now out there in nursing, we don't have studies that really assess their clinical reasoning and clinical judgment. One of the more commonly measured constructs, by the way, as it related to unfolding case studies was critical thinking, using instruments like the Health Science Reasoning Test or its kissing cousin, the California Critical Thinking Disposition Inventory. They're both by the same company, by the way. They're very similar. But in essence, three articles that really assessed critical thinking. One of them only did 2 case studies over the course of a semester, had no effect on critical thinking. 2 studies had 8 interventions. One had 8 interventions in a semester. One had 19 over an entire school year, about 8 to 9 a semester. Those 2 studies had a statistically significant effect on critical thinking. And we're going to kind of talk about, when I get to my study here in just a little bit, and just look at just the implications, because numbers are important. Just like high fidelity simulation, how many simulations you do in a semester? Is 1 enough? Is 2 enough? Is it 4? What is that magic number? Now, if there's anybody out there in the chat who is a high fidelity simulation, has done that topic, and if there is a number, I would call it a magic number, of how many high fidelity simulations do you need in a semester to have a demonstrable or statistically significant effect on clinical judgment, put it in the box. I'd love to see it. But the bottom line is that when it comes to unfolding case studies, the critical thinking, again, just 3 studies that were specific to my topic, and that's a gap, by the way. But there was nothing on clinical reasoning and clinical judgment. So that was the even bigger gap that I really wanted to address with my original study design that unfortunately was unable to do. What's really interesting, I want to encourage you all as nurse educators, there were 5 qualitative studies on using case studies and what students, qualitative or their emotive themes and what they took away from it, their lived experience. What was very interesting is that though educators typically get a lot of negative blowback from students and resist student learning, the qualitative themes in the literature was that students had positive experiences when they gave it the entire semester, not just one. They were scared the first case or first or second experience, but it gave them more self-confidence, were better prepared for practice, less anxious, more engaged in the learning process. Those are things that we all struggle with as nurse educators. Students found the unfolding case studies that were in other studies very helpful. And again, seeing the big picture, putting that all together was a very powerful takeaway. And so I did my study in a private baccalaureate nursing program in the rural southern United States. And again, using only the health science reasoning test as the instrument to quantitatively measure critical thinking. And so it was a smaller program of 42 students, and I wasn't able to meet or to reach adequate power or having an adequate sample size from that group to really have what you would consider reliable results. Out of the 42, I needed 38 to participate. I got 25. And so that was kind of a variable that kind of weakened the study at its very onset. Again, you have no control over who's going to participate. It's voluntary, you have the IRB, and it's all good. It was just basically, it is what it is. And so again, the intervention that I used were the unfolding case studies that Keith RN and which I am Keith RN, but that I've written several years ago and I've refined that again have Tanner's framework integrated. So what kind of makes the cases that I've written and developed a little bit unique is that they have a consistent framework and they really embody the essence of the 4 reasoning steps of Tanner. So they do integrate in a very intentional way Tanner's framework of clinical reasoning or clinical judgment. And we only were able to we originally were going to do 4 case studies over that semester. The pandemic hit, we got 3 done. And I just had to be fine with that. And so that was another potential confounding variable. Only able to do 3 interventions and not the 4 that I was able to be hoping for. And so again, we did the pretest HSRT, the critical thinking in a study. If you're a nurse educator and you're listening to this and you're really kind of saying, boy, I'd like to do, something to really kind of, student feedback is good, but let's get some data to support what we do in nursing education. What's really interesting, we don't have a lot of data to support most of what we do in nursing education. And you know what? As a PhD now, and I'd love to really do more nurse research, nurse education research. So I would love to empower and collaborate with other educators anywhere in the country on this topic of utilizing any form of interventional, meaningful active learning and see if we can really move the needle of the clinical reasoning that leads to clinical judgment. And so the HSRT is a really simple instrument. It's online, takes 50 minutes, it's 38 questions. That was why I was able to successfully complete my study, because we could do a post-test without having to be in class. And that really saved my study and allowed me to graduate, for which I'm very thankful. At the end of my study, I only had 19 participants because 6 of them had to be weeded out because they didn't take enough time on the HSRT. They went through it too quickly. A couple of them dropped out. And so I had a much smaller total of only like 10 in the control group and 9 in the experimental group. So again, that even further kind of whittled down my power a little bit further. And when you look at some of I'm not going to give you the numbers, but in essence, the mean, the health science reasoning test gives you 8 subcategories of some of the constructs of critical thinking, which are very valuable, like deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, and others. And then it has a summative overall thinking score. And so we went with my overall means with the control group and the experimental group. And you know what? They didn't really move the needle pre and post. And when it came to the end of the day, when all of the mixed MANOVA, which is, I'm not going to get into statistics tonight, but the bottom line is the significance or the p-value. You want it to be less than 0.05, where you can basically reject the null hypothesis that there was no effect. There was an effect. It has to be 0.05 or less in most studies. My p was 0.52, right in the middle. So the bottom line is with my study, it was kind of a little bit disappointing because you kind of, not that you have these expectations, but let's be honest, as researchers and you are passionate about a topic, you're kind of saying, I want an effect. I want to see see this as an improvement. And the bottom line is with my study, I had to just step back and the statistics are what they were. There wasn't a measurable effect and I had to accept what they call the null hypothesis, which if you're not familiar with that terminology, there wasn't an effect. And what was really interesting, I was really kind of bummed out. I'll just be honest with you. I was disappointed. Not that I was expecting, I wasn't, as a researcher, you have to be totally unbiased and distance yourself from this. But there was once, what I did realize, and this is what I want to kind of frame this takeaways for nurse educators, is that there was some incredible value to this study, that it took a little bit of time for the dust to settle. And that's this. The one study in the literature, which was Carter and Welch in 2016, and if there's anybody here who's watching this and they're nerds or would like to have something additional to read, I have the Excel spreadsheet of all 15 experimental studies and the 5 qualitative studies with kind of the summary highlights that I'd be glad to share with you. It's on my drive. I would love to attach it, and I'll share my email here at the very end. But the bottom line I want to share with you is that the one study that did not show a measurable effect of critical thinking was Carter and Welch, and they only used 2 case studies over the course of a semester compared to traditional teaching. My study was 3 studies, no effect. The other studies that were done in the research, 8 studies a semester, a significant effect across every construct of critical thinking, which again, some of the critical thinking aspects of the HSRT do kind of have some interlapping aspects of actually measuring clinical reasoning as well. And so the bottom line is that 8 studies had an effect. 2 did not. My study of 3. So if we want to kind of get, if you kind of look at some of the takeaways from this, well, we can begin to, in essence, begin to get closer to it. I think what my study can contribute to the body of knowledge, because that's what you do research for. You want to create knowledge that's going to guide and inform practice. That's the textbook definition of nursing research. And so the bottom line is that 2 isn't enough, 3 isn't enough, 8 was enough in 2 studies. So what that means is this. Can any educator out there do a case study of some form every other week over the course of a semester? I know that every one of you can. Now the goal is, this is the big picture goal, every time you teach, every week, 16 interventions of a meaningful active learning. It doesn't have to be a case study. You can do other contextualizing activities to practice. But 1 a week. I mean, the more you do, and this was one of the takeaways from the study that I want to highlight. In one of the studies that did have an effect, they also compared the effect of unfolding case studies, which is the essence of how mine are written, where you have a scenario. What's relevant and why? There's a question. Now it unfolds. Vital signs. What's relevant and why? Assessment. Relevant and why. Lab values. Relevant and why. And then go into putting it all together. That type of case study in the literature to one study is more effective to develop the clinical judgment than just a simple scenario, questions, you're done. So when it doesn't unfold, it still had an effect, but it wasn't nearly as strong as an unfolding case study. So another implication that I want to share with you as nurse educators from the nursing literature on case studies is that an unfolding case study has, because it unfolds with multiple scenarios and each one requires thinking. It's not just a one scenario and done. Now, sometimes we only have 20 minutes. We have just time for one scenario. That is still powerful. But if you have additional time, an unfolding with 2 or 3 more levels of unfolding is even better. So again, I want you to take away that. I want you to take away the frequency. I want to give every one of you who are listening to this, whether live or on the link, at least every other week. If you're teaching an entire semester course, if you can shoot for 8 case studies, 8 simulations, because they really are not case studies, they're low fidelity simulation, you can develop that clinical judgment that can lead to safe practice. And so that's something that I really, as educators, I would love to have you just embrace that. And, the implications for nursing policy, let's be honest, guess what's coming down in about 2 years from now? It's called Next Gen NCLEX. Guess what that format is? Unfolding case studies that emphasize the essence of Tanner's framework in their NCSBN model, by the way. So again, we can make this a win-win. This is why I want to empower you as educators. When you use innovative strategies such as case studies, unfolding case studies that simulate clinical realities, bring that clinical to class, you're not just preparing them for the NCLEX, you're preparing them for practice as well. And it's a win-win. So we can close the gap, prepare for NCLEX, even next gen, by simply using case studies consistently to replicate the thinking. Again, we're not teaching to the test. I want to get that kind of mindset out of us in nursing education of making it all about the NCLEX. Let's make it about practice, bringing practice into our classrooms because that's the priority. The NCLEX will take care of itself because it happens to be a practice-based test that's using unfolding case studies. Let's change the way we think and look at that. And so I want to just make some final recommendations because you know what? I have an audience and I want to just kind of plant some seeds tonight. I really do. And so in my dissertation, chapter 5, which is your recommendations towards the end, These are my recommendations. Additional research is still needed to develop the thinking that students need for practice. And we need to do more research on unfolding case studies, virtual simulations, problem-based learning, or any innovative strategy that you've done as an educator. If you've developed some little cool kind of scenario-based activity like I've done, and your students like it, do a study and see if do a good study and do some pre-post-test work and what that looks like. This study also needs to be replicated, and I would love to see any faculty out there get a vision to do the original study in its original construct of measuring all three constructs of critical thinking, the reasoning, the judgment, larger sample sizes, different programs. I'd love to see practical nursing, associate degree, as well as the baccalaureate in different parts of the United States and even other parts of the world. There's some great, China is doing a phenomenal amount of the bulk of the research on unfolding case studies, by the way. It's not coming from the United States, the most recent studies, just an observation. So again, looking at some of these principles, I'd love to see some longitudinal studies over the course of an entire year. How about if you have a multi-site campus and you've got one campus that tends to be more traditional and another satellite campus, you got some transformators over there that want to do it differently and bring active learning. Let's start doing use a campus as a control and experimental group. That's been done in the literature as well. So I just kind of want to get the wheels spinning. I know as educators, we're all inherently creative. And I just want to kind of give you permission and just to kind of, not permission, that's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Want to just kind of put some fuel on your fire, again, to make a difference in what that looks like. And so what I want to throw on the screen here is basically, I'm just going to throw this on. I hope it works. There it is. That's my email address. And so, you know what? If you are interested, if you would like my reference list there's about 15 experimental studies on different constructs, as well as the qualitative studies, or I've got a poster that's just a simple PowerPoint slide that I posted on the Facebook group, Teachers Transforming Nursing Education. You can download that. That provides a very concise summary of my study. I'm still waiting for my dissertation to come back from ProQuest, or not from ProQuest, but from my graduate reader. Once that is finalized, that'll be on ProQuest in the database, in the literature. Anybody can access it. I'll let you know when that happens. And so in closing, I'm going to wrap it up here. We're kind of going on here a little bit too long. But you know what? I have two objectives. One objective is this. I want to plant a seed for those that would like to do additional studies. But as I step back and my own my heart and just what I want to do as an educator, the legacy that I want to leave is that I believe that God's put on my heart a burden for the developing world, for nursing education in the developing world, where they struggle with the outcomes, the preventable deaths, and where there's a need to strengthen nursing education to improve patient outcomes significantly. And to do that with kind of a focus to bring active learning, to bring case-based learning to their problems in the developing world, to bring that and to develop that for those educators, and to form those relationships and partnerships with programs in the developing world, whether it be in this hemisphere or Africa, Asia, I don't know. But you know what? Keith RN is not about building my kingdom. I don't want a Keith RN. I want to influence nursing education, but Keith RN really wants to be more about building a kingdom, about the one who said, thy will be done, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, and to bring in that focus of caring, compassion into a program where nursing's respected. In some countries, nursing's not respected, and it's just task-oriented, and we need to kind of do what we can to strengthen and to really kind of affirm the dignity of serving, kind of like Mother Teresa. She, through serving in her caring, influenced the nations of India and other parts of the world. And I think nursing can be what I really believe is that nursing done in the right way can bring healing, not only to the patients that a nurse cares for with the right spirit, but also bring healing to a nation. And that's what I really want to be about in the last years of my life. And so if that resonates with you, or you have connections, or you're an international educator, you're watching this is the internet. And again, that email's for you. I would love to learn more and to do what I can to partner and to collaborate with you. And I can't do that alone. There's a lot of educators out there who are retired. Can any of you do a Zoom WebEx? Can you help and strengthen nursing education by just being present or helping to, use the gifts that you've been given? Just a thought. So anyways, I'm going to open this up for questions. But again, with what I shared tonight, what was your big takeaway? And any questions that you have regarding unfolding case studies to develop clinical judgment or next steps to implement a similar study? I'd love to hear from you. So it's like I'm going to put my chat box open, and I'm just going to kind of look here. And if you have some questions, I'm just going to kind of see what I've got. The most recent here from Diane, I'm just going to look down and I'll pop it on the screen. So Diane is just saying that her students are highly motivated using concepts of clinical reasoning. And again, clinical reasoning is what leads to the outcome of a clinical judgment. You see, we can't teach it directly. This is why Tanner's framework is so essential for us as educators to understand. And when I do surveys around the country, less than 10% typically are aware of Chris Tanner's model of clinical judgment. It's the essence of next Gen NCLEX, by the way, as well as the essence of the reasoning that a nurse is required to do to make the judgment of an outcome. So thank you for sharing that, Diane. And so, Mary Lloyd is saying, in my program, we use Tanner's clinical judgment model. Excellent. Reach out for future publication, collaboration, to use case studies, unfolding cases, and development of clinical judgment. Stay in touch, Mary Lloyd. I would love to hear from you. And Billy, thanks for your interest, and I want to participate. If there's anyone out there who has a program that would be receptive, this is where you as faculty, I would love to be a guide on the side. And I want you to know that now that my PhD is done, I would love to facilitate further research on this topic. And so just want you to know. And so the bottom line is that, Connie is asking, I'm interested in the spreadsheet you mentioned. So Connie, you've got my email on the screen. Please email me, and I'd love to get that to you. So if you love stats, if you like a nice, concise summary, you'll love the spreadsheet. It's very simple to read and go from there. Diane has a great question I want to answer. Was there not enough time or case studies performed? And so, yes, Diane, let me be very clear. Was the problem the case studies? You know what? The case studies that I believe that I've written are strong. I think they're stronger than most because they have a consistent framework in every topic. They don't change questions, and they emphasize Tanner's framework. So I don't think the case studies were the problem. But what I would say this, Diane, there wasn't enough interventions done. The original study design was for 4. 4, probably that 4th and final, it may have made a little bit, but based on the prior literature, this is where I can kind of say, I'm a little disappointed to say, well, my 3 interventions didn't cut it. But I think that what we as educators can take away, like I said earlier, we need to be doing at least 8. It's kind of like what is it that you need to do to lose weight? What's kind of how many calories can you have to lose those 2 pounds a week? And we have that regimen, we follow it. What I think my study really contributes is that 2 wasn't enough, 3 wasn't enough. I don't think 4 would have done it either, by the way. I would have expected the same results. 8. They require repeated repetition. And that's really consistent. If you really understand that thinking like a nurse, developing clinical judgment is a cognitive skill that needs to be practiced. In principle, no different than any practical skill like sterile technique. Think about how many times does it take a student to practice sterile technique and gloving and putting it in the urinary catheter without contamination. Did they do it on the first time? No. Second or third? No. Fourth? Getting close. 6 to 8. For those of you that are in the fundamental skills level, I'd like to get your observations in the chat. Give me a quick, if you're teaching any skill, how many times does it take to practice it to get proficient at a level where they can really see a difference, where you can see a difference as faculty? I'd love to get that. And Mary, I am jealous of you. You worked is that Ohio? I don't know what OH is, but I know there's a state university. You work with Tanner and Lassiter and would potentially have the opportunity to collaborate with them as well. Well, I want you to know that I've had communication with Dr. Kathy Lassiter, and so she knows me by name. I have some faculty in the Oregon Consortium using the unfolding case studies. So if you're up in Oregon or if that's your neck of the woods, there's no strangers there. I'd love to get in touch with you, Mary Lloyd. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Vicki, you love Tanner's model of clinical reasoning. You know what? That's the theoretical framework we need to really, I just again want to highlight that. That is a theoretical framework that should be consistent in all of our programs. Why isn't it? It's been in the literature for 14 years. Lassiter's clinical judgment rubric is based on Tanner. That has been established as a valid and reliable tool for simulation, of high fidelity simulation. Let's really, I think as educators, let's really embrace the literature, current practice, and what's in the literature to inform our practice to strengthen how we teach. So yeah, Vicki, love that. And Kat, you are here on this chat. I am so blessed. And so you said this, Kat was one of the colleagues that she was part of the Fab Four. Marina, Marianne, and Kat couldn't have done it without the three of them. And I'm the fourth, so that's where that came in. But she says this, another implication for your study is helping new grad nurses starting in critical care areas, not just students. And Kat, thank you so much for bringing that up, because what I kind of skipped over a little bit with my final implications, I kind of wanted to focus on nursing educators because that's really where most of the audience is. But as Kat is a practice-based educator in Texas. And, she's seen the new grads coming in and they're not ready. And so the unfolding case studies that can be used to strengthen the reasoning in the academic setting can also be used to help students identify, or new nurses can be used if you're like, for example, in a cardiac telemetry unit and you have a case study on atrial fibrillation. Let's see what your student knows about atrial fibrillation by working through the case study on their own. See what they know. Then identify the gaps and then precept to their weaknesses so they become a strength. And you can kind of do two things in the practice realm, because these case studies, thanks so much, Kat, for bringing that up, can be used to strengthen nursing in the practice setting with new nurses by identifying their weaknesses when they do an unfolding case study that, again, is open-ended, not multiple choice. That's why, again, not all cases are created equally. And so then we can again practice the reasoning in a different topic. And again, see how they're doing. We can assess their progress. So instead of just doing a multiple choice inventory or those checklists that we just kind of say, oh, I've done this, not that, let's do a case study to see what they really know. And I've written topics, I've got case study topics on Keith RN that you can use that are the bread and butter. I've also got an all-inclusive membership that has over 110 unfolding case studies of different levels of complexity. And that's at thinklikeanurse.co for more information. So thanks again, Kat. You're right on. I think that I'd love to, I'd love to work with you in utilizing my cases in your hospital in San Antonio, and stay in touch. And you've got a collaborator right here, man, who will partner with you to strengthen our preparation to practice in the practice setting. So thanks so much. Wendy, Had a question here. What would your findings look like in a 3-credit-hour advanced med surg course that meets 4.5 hours per week and a compressed time frame? Okay, how do your findings apply to the abbreviated time? You know what? I would love to have that conversation, Wendy, with you by email or by a phone call. And so the bottom line is that please, that's a little bit too complicated for a brief response here on a Facebook Live, but I would say that you could still utilize a consistent framework of active learning in your program on a regular basis. And, I've written different levels of like a skinny reasoning that's short and concise that unfolds briefly, or again, the unfolding that has a higher level of complexity and what that looks like. So email me, please. I'd love to have a conversation and help you any way I can. Gina asks a really good question. How do you get your peers to transition to active learning to have some repetitiveness with team teaching? And Gina, this has been, I think, the challenge that many of us have is that as educators, we need to really implement and really practice what we preach, that implementing educational best practice, such as unfolding case studies, active learning, isn't optional. That is educational best practice. Flipping our classrooms with active learning that's meaningful and contextualized to practice, we have to burn that ship of traditional lecture once and for all and not go back. And so we've got to I think we've got to lead by example, as well as by giving them a copy of Benner's Educating Nurses, A Call for Radical Transformation. And hopefully leadership is leading the charge to strengthen and transform your program and how nursing is taught. We should not have academic freedom, does not give us the right to resist resist educational best practice. I don't know why we do that, but we do all too often. So thank you for sharing. And Mary Lloyd again says it's Oregon. Yes, I knew it was Oregon. Health Science University. Mary, you are blessed because they are an innovator, and their curriculum that is based on Tanner's framework, I would love to see that seeded throughout the country. I don't know what the challenges are, but you're doing an incredible work in Oregon with Tanner's leadership, and her legacy is second to none. So, if you see Dr. Tanner, I've never met her. I met her once many, many years ago briefly, but I'd love to just connect with her at some point. So if we can make that happen, if you can give me a heads up, I'd love to. I can't even find her email anywhere. I think she's in semi-retirement or retirement. So anyways, interested in your thoughts about using escape rooms in simulation. Now, Mary, I'll be honest with you, I'm not an escape room person. I've not created escape rooms, but I know that my case studies with someone with escape room knowledge and experience can easily adapt those. And so I just want to give you encouragement to do that. And so, Vicki is saying I use unfolding case studies in the oncology department. Excellent. So you're teaching in the hospital setting, Vicki. Wonderful. I'd love some feedback if you want to give another chat out as far as just how are you using them? Are you using them as an evaluative tool, like I kind of suggested, or are you using them as like a practice, like a student, kind of let's practice the reasoning, kind of maybe what they may have missed in their program. Some programs are using more active learning than not, and so it makes a difference in the product that is graduating. So if you have a thought there, please do that. Raghi is saying, I'd like to meet with you to discuss integrating your case studies into a team-based learning environment in an entry-level master's program. And yeah, Raji, I hope you didn't lose my my contact, but there it is. And you know what? I would love to, again, my heart is to serve your needs and to do what I can do to strengthen nursing education. You're my first priority as nurse educators. So email me, Raji. I'd love to have that conversation. So thank you so much. And Kat says this, your study covers way more than nursing schools. Yeah, well, thanks, Kat. And you're amazing as well, by the way. It was a blessing to walk this journey with you and Marina and Marianne. So thanks so much. And Wendy says, yeah, I'll reach out. Thank you. And so, yeah, Mary Lloyd, again, what a blessing. And please reach out. And again, the email is there, and I would love to connect with any of you regarding related to international missions, or as well as anything with studies related to this topic of using low fidelity simulation to strengthen clinical judgment. And so, you know what? Thank you for hanging out with me for this last 55 minutes. It's been a pleasure. I hope you found this helpful. I'll let you know when my dissertation is officially finalized, and you can all access it. It's very brief. It's only about 75 pages, which is relatively short for a dissertation, but it's really powerful and practical. We'll go into deeper than what I shared with this brief presentation. But the poster is available on the Facebook group, Teachers Transforming Nursing Education. If you're not already inside that group, please request access. It's a closed group, but it got 6,000 educators from around the country, Canada, and other countries of the world. It's a blessing. We collaborate, we partner, and we work together to answer each other's questions and challenges. So for that, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to serve your needs in nursing education, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a great week.